A thief robbed an elderly woman on the subway without realizing Jason Statham was watching. Thank you for watching this story unfold with us. If you enjoyed this journey and want more compelling tales that challenge perspectives and stir emotions, be sure to hit that subscribe button and join our community here at the Story Atelier. Your support means everything to us and helps us bring more powerful stories to life. Don't forget to like, comment, and share your thoughts below. We'd love to hear your take on the story. Together, we can keep creating meaningful content that makes a difference. Stay tuned for more. And remember, every story has the power to change something. It was just another morning on the subway in Brooklyn. The train rattled its way through the dimly lit tunnels, a low hum resonating through the metal carriages. A gray, overcast sky filtered through the windows as the train clattered on its way, making its usual stops along the way. The passengers were a mix of tired commuters, some leaning against poles, others lost in their phones or newspapers. Tyler Harrison, an actor known more for his action-packed roles than for being just another guy on the subway, sat quietly in the corner of the car. His dark hoodie was pulled over his head, and a baseball cap shadowed his face. He was trying to blend in, to be invisible for once. No flashing cameras, no fans asking for autographs. Just a man riding a train, looking forward to a few hours of peace. Tyler had been famous long enough to know the toll that came with it. The constant pressure, the spotlight, the way people would swarm whenever they spotted him. It had been months since he'd had a moment of normalcy like this. He'd forgotten what it felt like to just be an anonymous passenger. The kind of person who could get on and off a train without drawing attention. He savored it as the train swayed and jerked its way through the stations. The smell of stale coffee and old leather mixed with the scent of fresh bagels from a nearby food cart. Tyler's eyes scanned the car, but his mind was elsewhere. He thought about his next project, his next big movie role. But as his gaze moved across the car, something caught his attention. A figure in a gray hoodie, too sharp-eyed, too restless. The young man walked in as the train pulled to a stop, moving quickly past a few seated passengers. Tyler observed him quietly, a sense of unease creeping in. He had seen that look before. The man wasn't just another tired commuter. There was something off about him. Restlessness, aggression. Tyler's instincts, honed over years of performing fight scenes, told him this guy wasn't just minding his own business. He was searching for something, or someone, to pick on. The man's eyes darted around the crowded car, scanning for a target. That's when he saw her, an elderly woman, hunched over slightly with a large handbag clasped tightly to her chest. She struggled to find a seat, her steps slow and deliberate, as if each one was a small victory against the weight of time. Her shoes scuffed the floor as she searched, a mixture of determination and resignation in her eyes. No one moved, no one offered her a seat. Tyler watched her face twist slightly with disappointment, her eyes darting around the car for a kind soul who might let her sit. It was a small moment, but it struck a chord with him. He wanted to get up, offer her his seat. But before he could even move, he saw the young man in the hoodie step forward. At first, Tyler thought the guy might offer her a hand, maybe assist her in finding a place to sit. But that wasn't what happened. "Move it, Grandma," the man sneered, his voice cutting through the quiet of the car like a blade. Tyler's blood ran cold. He had seen bullies before. He dealt with his fair share of rowdy, disrespectful types on set. But this was different. The woman looked up, startled and confused. She tried to move past him, but he blocked her path, his grin widening as he shoved her lightly with his shoulder. "Move, I said, move," the man barked, his voice now laced with venom. The old woman stumbled back, grabbing onto the pole for support as her handbag slipped from her hand. Thudding against the floor, Tyler's fingers curled into fists. He could feel his heart rate pick up, but still, he stayed seated, watching intently. Would someone else step up? Would one of the other passengers do the right thing? The young man wasn't done. He pushed the woman again, his laugh echoing in the silent car as a few passengers around him chuckled nervously. Others buried their faces in their phones, pretending not to notice. The old woman didn't speak, she simply reached for her bag, trembling as she tried to lift it from the floor. But the young man snatched it away, holding it high above her head like a prize. "Give it back," the woman cried, her voice cracking as she pleaded with him. "Now you got something to say." "Huh," he taunted, yanking the bag further from her grasp. "What's in there, Grandma?" "Your retirement checks." Tyler's jaw clenched as he stared at the scene, disgust swelling in his chest. He had every right to stand up, to do something, but he remained seated, watching, waiting. Was he hoping someone else would step in? Or was he just testing the limits of what people would tolerate in public? The few people who had their phones out didn't help. They recorded the moment like it was a circus show, their faces void of any real empathy. Tyler's hands were balled into fists. He could feel the tension building inside him. How long would he wait? How long would he let this go on before doing something? Tyler's heart raced as he watched the young man continue to torment the elderly woman. His eyes flicked across the subway car, searching for any sign of intervention, but no one moved. The few who glanced up quickly averted their gaze, too afraid to get involved. Tyler's chest tightened with frustration. Why wasn't anyone helping her? He knew what he had to do, but the question was, when? Was it his place to step in? Or should he wait for someone else to take charge? The internal battle raged inside him, but with each second that passed, the situation became more unbearable. The young man wasn't just mocking the woman now, he was actively stealing from her, taunting her with the bag she so desperately clung to. The tension in the air was thick, and Tyler could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. His instincts told him to act, but a part of him hesitated. This wasn't a film set. There were no rehearsed moves, no scripted scenes. It was real. There was real danger here. And what if it escalated? What if he made the wrong move? But then, just as the thief pulled the woman's bag out of reach once again, something shifted inside Tyler. The decision was made. The old woman's face was filled with disbelief as she reached out one last time, her hands trembling in the air. She was about to say something, but the young man shoved her once more, laughing as she fell backward, clutching the metal pole to steady herself. That was the moment. Tyler stood up. It was a subtle movement at first. His body shifted from the edge of his seat, his hands brushing the worn-out leather of the seat next to him. The change in his posture was deliberate but not aggressive. No one noticed at first. The thief was too busy enjoying the chaos he caused. The audience of silent bystanders watching passively around him. Tyler moved slowly, deliberately. Each step was measured. The cool, sharp precision of an action star honed through years of fighting choreographies. But this wasn't a movie. This was real life, and every step mattered. He moved toward the young man with the same calm demeanor, a quiet confidence radiating from his every movement. His heart beat faster, but his face remained impassive. He wasn't going to rush this. The subway car was filled with muffled sounds of commuters, but Tyler's steps were the only thing that stood out now. The young man, still swinging the bag and taunting the old woman, hadn't seen him yet. Tyler approached from behind, closing the distance. Just a few feet away now. The tension was suffocating. "What do you think you're doing?" Tyler's voice rang out, low but unmistakable, sharp enough to cut through the noise of the car. It wasn't loud, but it was enough. The young man froze. He turned slowly, narrowing his eyes as he sized up the newcomer. There was a flicker of recognition in the young man's face, but it was too late. He had already crossed the line. "Who the hell are you?" The thief sneered, his bravado not yet faltering. "Mind your own business, old man." Tyler didn't flinch. "Give her the bag," he said, his voice steady, his tone colder than it had been in years. It was a command, not a suggestion. His eyes were locked on the young man, a silent warning in the depths of his gaze. For a brief moment, there was silence in the subway car. The thief glanced around, searching the faces of the passengers for someone to back him up. But no one did. They all stared at their phones or averted their eyes, unwilling to get involved. Tyler felt his pulse quicken, but his composure never wavered. He wasn't going to let this moment pass. "Give it back, now," Tyler repeated, stepping closer, his gaze unwavering. "Last chance." The young man's grin faltered. The bravado began to fade as he realized that he wasn't going to intimidate Tyler. His body stiffened, and for the first time, doubt flashed across his face. He looked around at the crowd, hoping for support, but the passengers had all retreated into their own worlds. Avoiding the confrontation, Tyler didn't wait for the thief's next move. He stepped forward with quiet authority, his hand outstretched. The thief hesitated, his grip on the bag tightening. "This isn't a joke," Tyler warned, his voice low and firm. The young man's defiance wavered, and he finally dropped the bag. His eyes shifting uneasily, he muttered something under his breath as he crouched down to return the woman's belongings. The elderly woman, still shaken, reached for the bag, her hands trembling as she clutched it tightly once again. She didn't say a word, but the relief in her eyes was clear. Tyler nodded to her, a silent gesture of reassurance. The atmosphere in the subway car had changed. The once passive crowd had grown tense. The weight of the situation now fully realized. The thief, realizing that no one was on his side, stood up and backed away slowly. His smirk was gone, replaced by a look of frustration and fear. Tyler remained in the center of the car, his eyes never leaving the young man as he muttered something about this being a joke and that he'd only been messing around. But it was too late for excuses. Tyler had already seen the truth. The young man, his shoulders slumped, turned and shuffled toward the door. As the train slowed, he glanced back at Tyler one last time. But Tyler's gaze was hard, unyielding. The thief disappeared into the crowd as the doors opened. And just like that, the moment of crisis passed. But the weight of it remained. Tyler stood still for a moment longer, his body tense, as if waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. The subway car resumed its journey, the clatter of the tracks filling the air. Tyler returned to his seat, his body still on high alert. But the old woman had already settled back into hers. Her bag was safe in her lap, her hands steady. For a moment, their eyes met. She gave him a quiet nod, a small, grateful smile playing at the corners of her lips. Tyler didn't smile back. He didn't need to. He didn't do this for recognition. He didn't do it for applause. He did it because it was the right thing to do. The train rolled on, its passengers returning to their quiet, routine lives. But Tyler's thoughts were far from routine. He looked out the window, his mind still racing, as the subway continued its journey through the heart of Brooklyn. The subway rumbled on, but Tyler couldn't shake the feeling that the events that had just transpired were far from over. The silence in the car had returned, but it wasn't the same. The few passengers who had been too scared to intervene now sat quietly, staring at their phones or out the windows, as if trying to pretend the incident hadn't happened. But Tyler could feel the weight of the moment in the air, and it wasn't going to go away. The elderly woman was still gripping her handbag, her knuckles pale from the tension. Though the shaking had subsided, she had settled into her seat, her face tired but somehow relieved. Tyler sat across from her, trying to settle his own nerves. But his mind was still buzzing. The whole experience had happened so quickly, but it felt like it had stretched on for hours. The adrenaline still coursed through his veins, and the image of the young man's face, the defiance turning into fear, kept replaying in his mind. He leaned back in his seat, trying to relax, but every part of him was still alert. He looked around the car again, his gaze flicking from face to face. No one seemed to acknowledge what had just occurred. The man who had laughed earlier now sat staring blankly at his phone, his eyes glazed over, pretending nothing had happened. The woman who had been recording the scene still had her phone in her hand, but her face was now tight, uncomfortable. She wasn't filming anymore. She was just staring at her screen, avoiding looking at anyone. Tyler glanced at the old woman once more. Her eyes were still fixed on the bag in her lap, as if she feared it might be taken again. She hadn't said a word since the confrontation, but Tyler could see the weight of the ordeal was still with her. He knew it wasn't over for her, even if the train ride had returned to normal. The train slowed as it approached the next station, and Tyler could feel a strange tension building again. His body stiffened, the back of his neck prickling as if something was about to happen. He glanced at the door, his eyes darting quickly around the car. He saw the same people from before, still sitting in their seats. No one was talking, no one was looking at him, but he knew things weren't as calm as they seemed. He wasn't sure if it was just his instincts acting up or if there was something more going on beneath the surface. Just as the doors opened at the next stop, a passenger near the door stood up and glanced at Tyler. For a brief moment, Tyler met his gaze, and the man hesitated. Tyler could see the confusion in the man's eyes, like he was trying to place him. The man glanced back at the woman sitting across from him, then back at Tyler. There was something about the way he was looking at him, something that Tyler couldn't quite put his finger on. The doors closed, and the train lurched forward. The man had exited, but Tyler couldn't shake the feeling that the situation wasn't as over as he had hoped. He turned his head back toward the elderly woman. She was now sitting up straighter, but her eyes were still distant, as if she was still trying to process everything that had happened. Tyler thought about getting up, asking if she was okay, but something stopped him. Maybe it was because he wasn't sure how to help. Maybe it was because he didn't want to intrude on her space. Maybe it was just the quiet realization that there was nothing more to do. He had intervened. He had stopped the thief, but he couldn't erase the fear in her eyes or the way her hands trembled as she clutched the bag. The train continued to glide through the stations, the familiar squeal of the tracks beneath them. The sound of it was oddly soothing, almost like a lullaby, and for a brief moment, Tyler felt his muscles relax. But just as quickly, the tension returned. He was still hyper-aware, still scanning his surroundings. Then, it happened. Tyler felt a vibration in his pocket. He pulled out his phone. Glancing at the screen, there was a message from his agent, followed by several notifications from social media. Tyler's heart sank as he opened the message. His agent was already on top of the story. It was spreading, faster than he could have imagined. There were multiple mentions of him helping the elderly woman on the subway. His name splashed across headlines. The media was already calling him a hero. Tyler grimaced, his stomach turning. The last thing he wanted was attention for doing something he thought anyone would do in the same situation. But there it was. He was being painted as some sort of vigilante. The guy who stopped a robbery and became a hero. The very thing he had been trying to avoid was now thrust upon him. He turned the phone face down, shoving it back into his pocket. He didn't want to see it. He didn't want the world to turn his quiet moment of doing the right thing into a spectacle. But that was the nature of fame, wasn't it? Everything, even the most private actions, could become a public event. Everyone had an opinion, and everyone had a camera. He had seen it all before. But this time, it felt different. This time, it was personal. The train slowed again, and Tyler noticed the elderly woman glance at her phone for the first time since the incident. She tapped the screen, but her expression quickly changed. Her face tightened as she scrolled through something, and Tyler couldn't help but notice the way her fingers trembled. She was reading the same headlines that were now flooding Tyler's phone. She was seeing the same story, the one where Tyler was being glorified for helping her. Her eyes flicked up to meet his for a moment, but she didn't say anything. She simply gave him a small, grateful smile. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Tyler nodded in return, not knowing what else to say. It wasn't about him, not really. The woman had been the one to suffer, to face the fear, and now it was her moment of healing. And yet, here they both were, caught in a storm of attention neither of them had wanted. Tyler's thoughts were interrupted by the familiar announcement over the intercom. Another stop, another station, another reminder that the world around them kept moving, whether or not they were ready for it. As the doors opened, Tyler glanced at the elderly woman once more. She had calmed down a little, but there was still a tension in her posture. She was getting ready to leave the train, and Tyler could sense that she wasn't quite sure how to navigate this new reality. Was she safe now, or was she just waiting for something else to happen? The train doors opened wide, but before the elderly woman could stand, a young man on the platform caught her eye. He was staring at her, eyes wide, holding his phone in his hand. The woman's face went pale, her body stiffening as she saw the phone in his hand. The man was filming her, and Tyler knew right then that the cycle had started again. The spectacle, the attention, it wasn't over yet. Tyler watched as the elderly woman's eyes widened, her fingers twitching around the strap of her handbag. The young man on the platform, oblivious to the tension he was causing, held his phone up in the air. The woman's fear was palpable. She looked like a deer caught in headlights, unsure of whether to stay on the train or get off. Tyler could feel the familiar knot in his stomach tighten. The subway car was silent except for the occasional rattle of the train tracks beneath them. The young man didn't seem to notice the effect he was having on the elderly woman as he stepped closer to the door, still holding his phone in her direction. "Don't," Tyler muttered under his breath, but the words were swallowed by the noise of the train. It was the same situation all over again, people watching, recording, but not intervening. The doors hissed open, and the man took a step closer, as if emboldened by the privacy the moment provided. His eyes locked onto the woman. She flinched, shifting uncomfortably in her seat as she realized that she was the subject of someone else's unwanted attention. The young man's fingers twitched on the phone screen, his thumb hovering over the record button. Tyler could feel his breath hitch in his chest. He knew what was coming next. He'd seen it so many times before, a moment of quiet humiliation. Captured and spread across the internet in a second. No one cared about the story behind the moment. All that mattered was the viral clip. "Hey, you good?" Tyler asked, his voice louder now, though it was directed at the young man on the platform. The guy's head snapped up in surprise, his finger pausing mid-air. Tyler could feel the tension shift in the air as everyone on the train looked up, turning their attention toward the young man. But instead of backing off, the man smirked. "Yeah, I'm good, man," he replied casually, as if he hadn't just been trying to exploit the elderly woman's vulnerability. Tyler's jaw tightened. He could see the discomfort in the woman's face, and he could feel the frustration rising within him. He wanted to say more, to demand that the man stop, but something held him back. It was clear now that the young man wasn't going to stop until he got what he wanted. And as much as Tyler wanted to stand up and challenge him again, he knew that this wasn't the right moment. The tension had already shifted. He had intervened once, but now the train had become a stage, and the young man, along with a few others, were playing to the crowd of passengers, silently waiting for the next viral moment. Tyler glanced at the elderly woman again. She looked even more fragile now, her eyes darting between the man on the platform and the other passengers. Her discomfort was growing by the second, and Tyler couldn't ignore the way her shoulders hunched further, as though she was trying to shrink away from the attention. But she couldn't escape, not when the world was recording her every move. "Hey," Tyler said again, more forcefully this time. He stood up, walking over to the door. "You need to stop filming her." The young man finally lowered the phone, but only slightly. His gaze shifted between Tyler and the elderly woman, a defiant smirk still playing at the edges of his lips. "What's the problem, man?" he asked, his voice full of mock innocence. "I'm not doing anything wrong." Tyler stopped just short of the door, his feet planted firmly on the ground. His posture was calm, but the fire in his eyes was unmistakable. He wasn't going to let this go. "Not now. You're filming her without her consent. You think it's funny, but you're humiliating her. Let her be." The man chuckled, not taking Tyler seriously. "Oh, come on, bro. It's just a video. She doesn't care." The elderly woman's face flushed, and Tyler could see the embarrassment in her eyes. She had not asked for this. No one should have to live through this kind of invasion. especially when she had already been through enough. The young man was exploiting her vulnerability for entertainment, and no one in the car had the decency to say anything. Tyler stepped closer to the door, closer to the man. He could feel the intensity of the moment building again. The man, realizing the confrontation wasn't as easy as he thought, took a half step back, but the smirk didn't leave his face. Tyler stood his ground. This wasn't about proving something to the man or showing off. It was about doing what was right, standing up for the woman who had already been through so much, and not letting her dignity be stripped away any further. "Put the phone down," Tyler said, his voice calm but firm. "No one's interested in your joke." For a brief second, the young man looked around at the passengers, trying to gauge whether anyone would back him up, but everyone seemed to shrink back, unwilling to engage. There were no allies here, just silence. All right," the young man muttered, lowering the phone completely. "You don't have to be such a hard ass about it." Tyler took a step back, but his eyes didn't leave the man. The power dynamic in the car had shifted again. The young man, who had once been in control, was now just another face in the crowd, staring down at the floor, the phone now securely tucked into his pocket. The elderly woman finally seemed to breathe a little easier, her shoulders relaxing slightly. Tyler turned back toward her, giving her a small, reassuring nod. She didn't smile, but her gaze softened. There was a silent understanding between them, an unspoken thank you that didn't need words. The train slowed at the next stop. Tyler, feeling a sense of relief wash over him, glanced out the window. His heart was still racing, but the adrenaline was beginning to fade. As the doors opened, the young man who had caused the disturbance quickly exited, his face red and eyes downcast. The elderly woman didn't look back, her head turned toward the window as the train continued its journey. Tyler settled back into his seat, his thoughts still heavy. He had done what was right, but the weight of what he'd witnessed, the apathy of the passengers, the quickness with which the man had tried to turn the situation into something viral, stuck with him. It was a reminder of how often people let things slide, how quickly people ignored wrongdoing for the sake of convenience or entertainment. And yet, it was also a reminder that sometimes, one person speaking up was enough to change the tide. The train ride continued, but Tyler felt as though the entire atmosphere had shifted. The once quiet, almost unnoticed commuters now seemed more alert, as if the unspoken tension that had clung to the air had awakened them. The whole dynamic in the car had changed, but not in the way Tyler had hoped. The elderly woman, who had been at the center of it all, was now sitting a little straighter, but her face was still drawn with a quiet sadness. Her grip on the handbag hadn't loosened, but she had at least stopped trembling. Tyler caught her gaze again, offering her a small, silent nod. She returned the look, not smiling, but her eyes were filled with something that felt almost like gratitude, or perhaps recognition. Yet, Tyler couldn't shake the feeling that something was still unfinished, something he hadn't anticipated when he first intervened. The episode had become more than just a random act of kindness. It was now part of a larger story, one that the world had already started to rewrite. He pulled out his phone, his finger hovering over the screen. A wave of discomfort washed over him as he saw the flood of notifications. The headlines, the messages, the posts, all painted him as a hero. His agent had already sent a message, his manager asking for an interview, and the social media posts were flooding in faster than he could keep up. The same video that had captured the confrontation was now circulating everywhere. Tyler wasn't interested in the viral nature of it all, but he could feel the weight of the story being taken out of his hands. He wasn't a hero, he was just a guy who did what anyone should do. The story, however, had already taken on a life of its own. The woman across from him was clearly reading the same thing. Tyler could see the faint frown on her face as she scrolled through her own notifications. She wasn't looking at him, she didn't have to, but it was clear she was reading the same viral headlines. The media, the headlines, they were all about him, about the guy who had stopped the thief. They were calling it a heroic act, But it wasn't about him. It had never been about him. Tyler knew the truth. The real story was about the woman. Her name, Dorothy Henderson. She was 72, retired, and, until today, had lived a quiet life in Brooklyn. She was someone's mother, someone's grandmother, and now, she was a victim of something much bigger than just a robbery. It was about the silence of the bystanders. It was about the apathy that surrounded people when they should have stood up and helped. It was about how people were more comfortable recording suffering than stopping it. Tyler felt a quiet anger rise in him, but it wasn't directed at the thief or the passengers who had watched. It was directed at how quickly the truth could be twisted, how easy it was for the world to ignore the real issues. The fact that Dorothy had been mistreated, the fact that no one had stepped in until it was almost too late, that was the story. Not his, not the fact that he stepped in to help. It was the failure of everyone else who did nothing. Without thinking, Tyler unlocked his phone again, this time with a new sense of purpose. He opened the camera app. Holding the phone in front of him, the image of Dorothy's face still lingered in his mind. The vulnerability she had shown, the way she had tried to avoid the attention, the way she had clutched her bag like it was the only thing holding her together. His finger hovered over the record button, and he took a deep breath. He wasn't going to let the world rewrite this story. Not this time. The phone's camera clicked on, and Tyler leaned forward slightly, his face filling the screen. His expression was calm, but his eyes were focused. Serious. You've probably seen the video by now. He began, his voice steady. The one where I step in and stop some idiot from taking advantage of an elderly woman on the subway. They're calling me a hero, but I'm not. I'm just a man who did the right thing when no one else did. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. He could already hear the click of comments being posted. The criticisms, the accolades. It didn't matter. He wasn't doing this for attention. This isn't about me. This is about the woman who was harassed. Her name is Dorothy Henderson. She's 72 years old. A retired nurse. Someone's mother. Someone's grandmother. She didn't deserve what happened to her today. But the worst part wasn't the guy who attacked her. Tyler's jaw tightened as he spoke the next part, each word feeling like it was coming from a place of deep frustration. The worst part was that no one did anything to help her. People watched, people laughed, people filmed, but no one stepped up until it was almost too late. So, before you call me a hero, ask yourself this: what would you have done? Would you have helped, or would you have just stood there? Recording it, Tyler leaned in closer to the camera, his eyes sharp, direct, because that's the real story. The real story isn't about some actor who stepped in to help. The real story is about how easy it is to do nothing, and how hard it can be to do what's right when no one else does it. He paused again, his words sinking in. He wasn't looking for praise. He wasn't looking for the media to glorify his actions. He wanted people to understand what had really happened. This isn't about me. This is about how each one of us has to make a choice when we see something wrong. Will we sit back and watch? Or will we step up and do something about it? Next time, it could be you in that situation. What will you do when no one else does anything? Tyler finished the recording and sat back, his heart still racing. He didn't feel relief. He felt exhausted, but there was a sense of clarity in his mind now. The world might try to rewrite the story, but this time, he was going to make sure the truth was told. His phone buzzed, the notifications flooding in once again, but this time, he didn't feel the same weight. He had said what needed to be said. The story wasn't his to control anymore. The people watching, the ones who were too scared to act, too comfortable in their apathy, had their own part to play in the unfolding narrative. It was up to them to change it. Tyler glanced at Dorothy once more. Her face had softened a little. She was still reading something on her phone, but for the first time since the confrontation, she seemed a little lighter. Maybe the weight of the day had started to lift. When the train finally pulled into his stop, Tyler stood up, giving Dorothy one last nod of respect. She caught his eye for a brief moment and gave him a small, faint smile. It wasn't much, but it was enough. As he walked out of the train and onto the platform, the world outside continued. The city buzzed with its usual noise, its usual chaos. But for once, Tyler wasn't just another face in the crowd. He wasn't a hero, and he didn't want to be. He was just a man who had done the right thing. And that was enough for him. And maybe, just maybe, it would be enough for the world to see that sometimes the real hero is the one who doesn't stand out. The one who does what's right without expecting anything in return.